Good afternoon. My name is Alan Lanham. I'm Dean of Library Services, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the continuation of our series on ancient Greece. And today there are several activities, including the one you're in now, and then there's one the next hour right here. Consult your brochures that I think were handed out at the door. And this evening at 7 o'clock in the library atrium you can sit in the Colosseum and see Greek theater presented by Eastern students. And everything is free, of course. And so I hope you'll partake of those. Tomorrow there's a film. And then next week there's a variety of disciplines represented by faculty members addressing us, as will happen today. So we're happy that you're here and hope that you too become intrigued in the world of ancient Greece and how it is still alive in our thoughts and actions today. To introduce our speaker, I present the coordinator of this series, Dr. Wafik Wabi from the School of Technology.
Welcome to the geography session of ancient Greece. And last year we spent some time with Egypt, ancient Egypt. This year the futuristic look through ancient lenses takes us to the natural progression to ancient Greece. And if you read the news today, then news, our speaker said that we trace our geography knowledge back to Greece, something like that. I don't know. I'll ask him. And before I introduce him, or just to introduce him well, he introduced Dr. Alan Baharlu last year, so I'll ask him to come and introduce him today.
Thanks, Wafi. As you all know, geography is the most fundamental feature of the planet Earth. The land, the sea, the vegetation, the presence of water, climate is the most important factor affecting distribution of our human species and their accomplishment and their culture, their art. And fortunately, we have an accomplished scholar, published many papers, traveled many places, Dr. Michael Cornebise, to give you that picture and how that geography, that setting, that landform affected one of the most significant ancient civilizations, which, by the way, set many patterns, ideas, philosophies that we still follow from that land. So, without going further, Dr. Michael Cornebise.
Thank you. Okay.
It's a pleasure because he's my son-in-law.
I was just going to say, in the interest of full disclosure, he is my father-in-law, so thank you for those kind words. I'd also like to recognize really quickly Dean Lanham and Wafik Wabi for putting this together. They've done a great job. Please come and see some of the other activities going on. I'd also like to personally recognize Professor Lee Patterson, who provided me with some great reading material on Strabo. I'm going to be talking a little bit about him. And Lee, I'm going to invite you, if I make any mistakes, please let me know. Okay, now, first of all, I need to put on my professor hat because my class is here right now, so bear with me for just a sec, everyone. I have a few announcements for my students, and then I'll get right into my presentation. Okay, wearing two hats today. Guys, just want to remind you that next Tuesday, your video reaction papers are due. Those are the video options, the European Union on the modern Greece that we saw, microcredit, coffee go round, and then this time next week, you guys are going to be sweating out an exam, all right? So be ready for that. The rest of you can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to give you a test next Thursday. Okay, so let's get right into the talk. And this is a general outline for today's discussion. First of all, I'm going to set things up by taking a look at Greek geographic thought in context, giving you a little bit of background to get into the rest of the discussion. Discussing a little bit about Greece's physical setting, because we can't really understand its full geographic import without understanding the physical attributes of Greece itself. Then what I'm going to do is focus on some very important Greek geographers. Now, there are a whole host of ancient Greek geographers that I can concentrate on. So what I've done is decide to narrow it down to three that I think have had the greatest impact. There are others, certainly, so I don't want to sound like I'm leaving anybody out. But Eratosthenes, Strabo, that Dr. Patterson helped me out with, and Ptolemy. And then we'll sum things up by taking a look at Greek contributions to modern geographic practices, because as Professor Baharlu stated, we are still living with the legacies of those ancient Greek ideas and ancient Greek thought. Okay, but before we jump right into it, I want to orient you to some of the locations we're going to be looking at. Now, this is a map of classical Greece, as you can see, at about 450 BC. And I just want to point out a few areas. Of course, Athens, kind of the hub of everything, if you will. Here is Athens, located right here. This is the Athenian Empire at about that same time, with its allied states in red and then the subjects in green. And as you can see, quite active throughout this area, including the Aegean Sea, today what we call the Sea of Marmara, the Black Sea up here as well. We're also going to talk briefly about the city of Miletus, which is located here. Miletus, known as an Ionian city, okay, at its height, quite a bit of power in Miletus. Also, just want to orient you to the island of Rhodes. I will mention that along the way. And then just here's Crete and Cyprus. And then just to orient you further, this is the modern country of Turkey. Okay, so in general, that's what we're going to be going. And let me expand on that. Even though we're talking about the ancient Greeks, a few of these Greek geographers were actually active during the Roman Empire. Okay, particularly Ptolemy, who we'll be talking about at the end. But I want to introduce a few areas here. First of all, Cyrene, which is located here, modern-day country of Libya, located on the coast there. Of course, Alexandria, I'm sure you're all familiar with, in Egypt. And then Pontus, which is located right up here on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea. The other thing I want to impress upon you is that even though, think back to the map I just showed you about the Athenian Empire, which is relatively compact compared to the greater Roman Empire. Well, it was the expansion of the Roman Empire that gave more import to many of these Greek ideas and allowed the Greek scholars to expand not just their knowledge of the world at that time, but to come into contact with other groups of people that further fed in to their knowledge of geography and other disciplines as well. Okay, and also I've got Aswan down here. We're going to talk about Aswan. That will prove to be an important city here. Okay, so a little bit of background to get things started. The Greeks, no way around it, they were generally what we call universal scholars. They were polymaths, okay, meaning that they didn't just study geography, at least the geographers I'm going to be speaking of. They were philosophers, historians, physicists, political scientists, mathematicians, biologists, all at the same time, okay? And as a matter of fact, if we were to bring many of these Greek scholars back to the present, they wouldn't recognize these, what we define as relatively narrow disciplines, okay? They would think, well, that's sort of strange that you have this narrow discipline of geography as it's defined today. So there was really a lack of disciplinary boundary lines. And that's not to say that we can't identify many of these geographers, particularly in that light, okay? But just realize that we're talking more broadly about scientists now. And they drew from many, many disciplines, mathematics, philosophy, things of that nature as well. We also need, I guess, to ascertain that the term geography comes from the ancient Greek, geographia. And those of you who have taken my class know that that's one of the first things we start off with. So you're well aware of that. But geography really means to write about or describe the earth. And where you see graph, you might think, well, that probably means to map, correct? Well, yes and no. Really, ancient geography was not just about mapping, even though we are going to be talking about the influences of mapping. It was more about description and descriptive aspects of the earth. Now, geography is, in and of itself, a synthesizing field. And my class can tell you right now, we just got through talking about economic issues. We just got through talking about the political issues related to geography. So they're well aware of drawing from these different disciplines. Geography is very much a synthesizing field, and the Greeks, too, were also great synthesizers of past and also contemporary knowledge. Matter of fact, we owe a great debt of gratitude to many of these scholars because they, gave us the gift of that past knowledge, and then were able to pass it along down the line. So as was mentioned earlier, we still draw from that knowledge. Okay, taking a look at the context now, the ancient Greeks originally, of course, believed that the earth was flat. Think of it as a saucer, okay, sort of a saucer shaped. It was round, but it was flat. And it wasn't until Pythagoras discovered that the earth was in fact a sphere. Okay, so we attribute that to Pythagoras. Before that, and even after that time, let me just do a quick drawing up here. We have an ocean, okay, the Earth ocean, that runs in a circular pattern around in the periphery, in the peripheral area. Okay, but being flat, of course, this posed some problems. What happens if you go too far to the end of the Earth? You fall off, right? Now, eventually, of course, it was discovered that it was a sphere, and of course, that changed thinking. The other thing we really need to impress upon you is that the Greeks had a very ethnocentric worldview. Now, this isn't to pick on the Greeks, because the Greeks, like everybody else, tend to think of themselves as, well, you know, we're a bit special. And so Greece was the center of their universe. As a matter of fact, they made the distinction between themselves, the Greek cultures, the civilized people that had adopted the Greek, you know, had been colonized by the Greeks. And then, of course, the barbarians, those in the outer reaches who had not been civilized. The maps I'm going to show you, though, one thing you will notice is that Greece is definitely indicated at the center of those maps. Well, Homer wasn't on my initial list, but we can't start a discussion of Greek geography without talking about Homer. As a matter of fact, many of the Greek geographers indicate that he was the quote-unquote father of geography, even though I'm going to give that title to somebody else here in a little bit. And, of course, Homer, most famous for his two works, the Iliad, at least what were attributed to Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Iliad, more of a historical account, but the Odyssey, very much a geographic account of the fringes of the known world at the time. And keep in mind, this was written in the 8th century BCE. And if you remember the Odyssey from way back when, it's been a while since I've read the Odyssey, but one of the things you may recall is Odysseus encountering strange beings, of course. Keep in mind that the gods were involved all along the way in this process. But one of the things, if you read sort of between the lines, he encounters strange lands, one of which we see the sun, almost 24 hours of sunlight, and then in another case, encountering a land where you have almost complete darkness. Well, this indicates that the Greeks at least had knowledge of the northern reaches of Europe, where you have that situation in the summer and winter months, when you get very little sunlight in one case and very little darkness in the other case. So this is grounded. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the Odyssey is grounded in geographic knowledge. Okay, and there have been attempts to try to trace out the geography of his trek, but it's very difficult, obviously, to do that. Okay, so speaking about the maps, this is a world map at the time of Hecataeus of Miletus. There's Miletus that we were talking about before, from the 5th century BCE. And notice what is at dead center of this map. It is Miletus. Okay, so no surprise there, I guess you could say. A couple things about this map that we need to consider. One is there's that ocean we were talking about, okay, that occupies the periphery of our map. And then we notice Europe. The further north you go in Europe, the more nondescript it is, very little in the way of detail. Same is true in Africa and Asia. One thing you might notice specifically about Asia is that Persia and India that's as far east as it goes. Okay, so knowledge of China and other areas still very much not there. But the other thing you should notice is the fair amount of detail in the Mediterranean area. Okay, we notice the boot heel of Italy, of course, Greece itself, the Aegean, Sea of Marmara, Black Sea, Sea of Azov are fairly, there's a fair amount of detail there. And we also see the same thing in Egypt with Memphis and in the situation there with the Delta. Okay, so that's fairly accurate if you want to put it in those terms, and a fair amount of detail here. As you move away from that center of Miletus, you see that begin to break down. So we discussed the river ocean running clockwise around Earth's perimeter, and then the Mediterranean Sea, for all intents and purposes, split the world in half at that time. Okay, and you can see how that plays out. Now this schemata over here just shows what we've been talking about, Greece as the center of the universe. It wasn't just the center of the earth, it was the center of the universe, because this was when they envisioned the earth, or the universe, as geocentric, meaning the earth was the center, rather than heliocentric, the sun being the center of the solar system anyway. So we have Greece here in the center, Africa, Europe, and then we have a few groups such as the Celtic peoples, the Scythians, the Persians, who the Greeks regarded as barbarians. Okay, they were not part of what they call the Greek, the broader Greek ecumene from the beginning. We're going to talk about ecumene here in just a minute, but anyway, from the earliest times, you can see that the Greeks envisioned themselves as the very center of their universe. Okay, and I just want to share with you some of the built landscape here. This is getting back to Homer. One of the things you have to keep in mind is that early seafarers that produced an awful lot of these maps, they didn't have very sophisticated instrumentation and things of that nature. So they oftentimes relied on the winds to help them navigate. This is a structure known as the Tower of the Winds in Athens. It indicates at the time what they call the 8 wind directions. And each of these friezes up here indicates one of those. It's an octagon, 8-sided. Also served as a clock tower with a sundial. Now, a few of the examples, I'm not going to put all 8 down, but the mariners back in the day called the north wind the Boreas. The north wind was strong, cool, and brought clear skies. So whenever they saw those conditions, they reasoned that wind was coming from the north, and that helped them try to figure out which direction they were going. By contrast, Zephyrus here, west wind was balmy, brought in humid conditions, sort of like today, I guess you could say, but also gale force wind. So it could be also difficult to sail under those conditions. And then I didn't include the rest, but you get the idea that they utilized wind to help them navigate back in the day before more sophisticated methods for doing that very thing. Okay, now this isn't meant to be an advertisement for Greece, although these aren't half bad here. You know, how would you like to be on this white sandy beach today? Not a bad thing to do. But Greece, in terms of its physical setting, located on the Balkan Peninsula, okay, very mountainous, made up of island groups. As we've learned in my class this semester, this is what we would call a fragmented country, one that is not contiguous. Matter of fact, it's noted in the lack of the fact that it's not contiguous. Also made up mainly of limestone soils, okay, and you can see that very clearly here. Because of this geography, the ancient Greeks were very maritime oriented, okay, and that's why they were great seafarers. And this is what linked up the empire. It was a sea oriented society, maritime oriented society. The other thing we need to consider is when you have a fragmented country, it can be very difficult to keep things together. Okay, this can be what we call a centrifugal force. It tends to pull the country apart, and Greece certainly had that situation. Now, notice we're talking about its core physical setting, because as we discussed before, the Greeks established their empire outside of their core as well, and the Romans even extended it further from that point. Okay. But the core of Greece, thinking about it as a core and periphery type of situation, very mountainous island groups. And this, just to reiterate that fragmentation here, we can see that quite clearly here. Islands, and very, very mountainous. It doesn't show up on this map here, but you get the situation. You get the gist of that through this map. Okay, what I'm going to do now is depart from that and focus in on the 3 geographers that I identified earlier. And we're going to start with Eratosthenes. And by the way, these dates, when you start looking around, and Leah's nodding his head, it's hard to nail down these dates. And you find a different source, it can be a completely different date. So I just want you to realize what I've done for these 3 geographers is gotten these from the same source, so that hopefully, it's going to be relatively accurate. But he was from Cyrene here, which is, once again, the northern coast of Africa, what is today Libya. I mentioned that a lot of Greek geographers thought Homer to be the father of geography, but Eratosthenes, in more recent circles, is deemed that. And one of the reasons is he was credited with coining the term geography. Okay. He also had many other things going too, though. He served as the chief librarian in the Alexandria Museum. And Dean Lanham, I don't know if you know this or not, this was one of the top scholarly positions of the day. I mean, if you were the chief librarian, boy, that was top dog. It was almost like being the chair of the geography department, right? It was right up there with that. So anyway, he served as the chief librarian in the Alexandria Museum, meaning he had a top position in society. One of the things he is most known for, in the area of geography anyway, is that he accurately calculated the Earth's circumference. Okay? And what's kind of interesting is his calculation, if we translate that into miles, was about 25,000 miles in circumference. And if you take a look at the actual circumference with modern equipment, it's about 24,860. So he wasn't that far off. Fairly accurate. Ability to do this. So how did he do it? That's the question. It's sort of like, how did the Egyptians build the pyramids? How did he figure this out? Well, it's kind of interesting. And this is where I want to back away a little bit and talk about geography. I like to make the assertion that geographers are great observers. To be a good geographer, you have to be a good observer, to see what's going on in the landscape. Well, this is a good example of Eratosthenes serving as an excellent observer, because what he realized, and this is Aswan, okay, what is today Aswan, on the summer solstice. And what they noticed is on the summer solstice in a particular well, this was a deep well, they could see the entirety of the sun in this well, meaning that the sun was directly overhead. The sun's rays were directly overhead. I mentioned that he was from Cyrene, but of course he spent most of his days in Alexandria. So back in Alexandria, using an obelisk here, this is effectively a sundial, he realized that the sun's rays were not coming down directly because there was a shadow. Okay, so what he did is he measured that shadow, and understanding, well, here, let me move to the next slide, and this will make maybe a little bit more sense to you. We have the light from the sun coming down to, this is Aswan Syene, okay, which is coming down directly. It's also coming down at this directly here on Alexandria, but well, it's coming in this direction. But the obelisk, of course, you're seeing that shadow showing up. And he calculated this to be at 7 degrees, okay, at 7 degrees. The caption here states, on the day of the summer solstice, sunlight fell to the bottom of the well at Syene, but the sun was about 1/50th of a circle, about 7 degrees, south of the zenith at Alexandria. This told Eratosthenes that the distance from Syene to Alexandria was 1/50th of the circumference of the Earth. Using that knowledge, he was able to calculate fairly accurately the radius of the Earth. Now, one of the things, that sounds all well and good, right? However, what's kind of interesting about this is he assumed that Alexandria and Syene were on the same meridian. Okay, meridians are lines of class. What is a meridian again? Kathleen? Line of longitude, right, absolutely. So he assumed they were not. Okay, there's actually, Alexandria is about 3 degrees to the north and the west of Syene. Okay, but it just turns out that despite that error, he was able to calculate this because there was also another error in the distance between Syene and Alexandria, which was calculated using what they call stadia at the time, the length of a stadium. That was a length of measure. Okay, of course, we translate that today into miles, and it comes out to be about 500 miles. Okay, there was a little discrepancy there, and it turns out it was almost a wash, though. The differences in the errors made it fairly accurate. Okay, so kind of getting back to this point, if the Earth was flat, this also proved, of course, that the Earth was not flat, because if it was, then the rays would be direct in both Syene and Alexandria at the summer solstice, but that wasn't the case. Okay, so that indicated that there was curvature to the Earth, and once again, as we talked about, this was the way that he indicated that. Okay, and of course, 800 kilometers, that's 500 miles, and that's how he got very, very close to the actual circumference of the Earth. So that's one of his, one of the ways that he contributed greatly to the discipline of geography. The Tropic of Cancer is roughly about 23.5 degrees north latitude. I say roughly because it actually varies. Okay, you may not have thought about that a whole lot, but it can vary year to year on the basis of where the sun is at its zenith on the summer solstice, and it's roughly about 23.5 degrees. Not a surprise that Syene is located pretty close to that border, Tropic of Cancer, and then, of course, Alexandria located on the coast. Okay, so that was one of his contributions. He also prepared a world map using lines of latitude and longitude, and he used, not surprise here, his prime meridian ran through Alexandria. Okay, getting back to this idea of sort of ethnocentrism playing out, that was definitely the case. Now, the other thing, another contribution, if you will, is he extended the ecumene at the time. Ecumene is a Greek word, and we did talk about this in my geography class earlier, and it refers to the habitable portion of the earth. But it has changed, actually changed meaning over time. We'll talk about that here in a second. The other thing that Eratosthenes did at this time was he identified 5 zones of quote-unquote habitability, where humans can live on the planet. He had the torrid zone, which is associated with the tropics. And in the idea of the Greeks, torrid zone, it was too hot. People were too lethargic in that area, and so civilization couldn't flourish in the tropical areas. 2 temperate zones on either side of that, and then bookended by 2 frigid zones as we move towards the poles. And the frigid zones as well, civilizations couldn't flourish there because they were too cold. Okay, so the 2 temperate zones, that's where the Greeks were found, and other groups as well. So in other words, that was the ecumene. Now the meaning of the ecumene has changed over time. Matter of fact, for a while, the ecumene referred to Greek civilization. That was the ecumene. But matter of fact, as the Romans began to expand, the ecumene, as it was thought of, also began to expand and began to change over time. Okay. Anyway, that was Eratosthenes. Now we're moving on to Strabo, and once again, those dates, Leanne, I'm not sure those correspond with all the dates. Pretty close, I think. 63 BCE to 21 CE. He was from Pontus, which is on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea here. Amasya, located right here. Although he spent a lot of his time outside of this area, he did come back towards his later years to his home territory. Okay, so Strabo, as we were talking about earlier, he was a geographer, he was a historian, and also a philosopher. Okay, he was all of these things. And this is where I can mention that one of Lee's contributions, I think, is demonstrating how Strabo can also be an ethnographer as well. He dealt a lot, or you can, matter of fact, ascertain aspects of kinship by reading Strabo, and Lee has done that very thing. So other applications here, not just geography, history, and philosophy. We can think of this in terms of anthropology as well. Now, his principal work was entitled The Geography. It was 17 volumes. There were 8 books devoted to Europe, 6 to Asia, and only 1 to Africa. He had 2 other books where he talked about his sources. He described his methods and things of that nature. But this is a massive, massive work. And the interesting thing about this was in its day, it wasn't really thought of much. It really wasn't, matter of fact, Pliny the Elder, who written another treatise on geography soon thereafter, didn't even mention it. Okay, it wasn't even mentioned. But it was several hundred years later that people picked back up on Strabo and realized what a great resource it really was, and continues to be, as a matter of fact. Strabo, one of his major contributions was he was a compiler of earlier Greek geographic work. Matter of fact, we talked about Eratosthenes. We don't have a whole lot of records of Eratosthenes, but Strabo did, and a lot that we know about Eratosthenes we learn through Strabo. Much of his work is descriptive in nature. As a matter of fact, he thought that, at least my reading of it, that Eratosthenes was a little bit too hung up with the mathematical side. And he thought, we need to get down and actually describe what's going on in these areas. And in fact, that's what he did. A lot of description. And that has served as a wealth of information for a lot of scholars, as a matter of fact, that descriptive work. And that, I guess it's worth mentioning that, in a sense, sort of divides geography as it is today. We have sort of the applied aspect of geography, the map-making portion, the geographic information sciences, maybe transportation, things of that nature. And then we also have the descriptive side of geography. Strabo, even though he drew from the applied aspect, he was very much on the descriptive side of things. However, he was, if you look at his readings here, very geographically geographical determinism, I should say, played a big role. Culture groups were ascribed characteristics based on locational attributes. Now, before we pick on Strabo, keep in mind that what we call later environmental determinism was a big issue back 80 years ago, even here in this country. People like Huntington, a geographer, thought that people were the way they were because the environment created them, essentially. Okay, climate played a big role in how culture groups developed. Well, we take a more nuanced approach to that now, I would say. Environmental determinism, geographical determinism is less important. The role of culture today is more important because, and we know this because looking at, for example, in the torrid zone in the tropics, we have many different culture groups that have developed there and have come up with many different ways of adapting to those climatological controls, or maybe control isn't the right word. Limitations potentially is a better word there. So, but the Greeks did ascribe cultural attributes to people who were found in particular climate zones. This is Strabo's world map circa about 18 CE, and you notice it does differ a little bit from the map that we saw previously for Eratosthenes. Still an awful lot of detail in this area. You notice that, of course, we do have some of the mountain ranges over here now. Well, he doesn't have the Alps on this one, but he did indicate the Alps. And Strabo also thought that anyone who lived north of the Alps couldn't be civilized. They were spending all their time sitting around fires trying to keep warm to be civilized. And so that was part of the barbarians that were indicated earlier. You notice, of course, we have India here to the extreme east. Notice Africa is actually referred to as Libya. Okay, and the Greeks did refer to it as that. But once again, quite a bit of detail here. Also, the use of the grid system, the latitude and longitude that we think of today, implemented by Strabo as well. Okay, Ptolemy. And once again, these dates can differ quite substantially. From Alexandria. Ptolemy also had many hats. He was an astronomer, a mathematician, a geographer, and also a physicist, probably most known in the field of astronomy, but he had quite a bit to do with in the area of geography as well. He also worked at the Library of Alexandria, so as we mentioned before, one of the top positions in the Greek world. Now keep in mind, Ptolemy was in fact part of the Roman period. Okay, by that time Rome had taken over Greece. And I like to really, I guess, to visualize this, Ptolemy was the bookend, so to speak, the end of the era for ancient geographic thought. So past Ptolemy, it was several hundred years before we get back into sort of more discussion, more movement in the area of particularly in geography, but other areas as well. But Ptolemy was really the end of an era. Okay, and his major work was the Guide to Drawing Maps of the World. It was an 8-volume work. Okay, also sometimes just referred to as geography, the term geography. One of the major contributions in this case was this was the world's first comprehensive, what we call a gazetteer. Now there had been gazetteers before Ptolemy, so he wasn't the first one to publish a gazetteer, but he was the first one to publish a comprehensive gazetteer for this region. A gazetteer is a geographical dictionary or a directory. Okay, it would be sort of like an annotated atlas where you've got several different components of this. You have the latitude, longitude of an area. You may have the population listed these days. If you take a look at a modern gazetteer, you have the population. Then you have other attributes going on, or listed, I should say, in these areas. The other thing is that he assigned coordinates to all the places included. Okay, so very systematic. Okay, in his construction of this gazetteer. And unlike the previous geographers we talked about, he actually used a line through the Canary Islands or potentially Cape Verde, there's still debate on that, as his prime meridian. And of course the equator was at 0 degrees latitude. But prime meridian was much further to the west than was previously the case. And if we compare the maps of Ptolemy to Eratosthenes and Strabo, notice the difference in dates here. I realize from where you're sitting you can't see an awful lot of this detail, but this is his prime meridian, of course. little bit more detail for Africa. Notice this is referred to as Africa, not Libya now. Libya is a sub-component of that. Here's Europe up here. India, but notice things have moved further to the east there from India. Scythia is located up here as well. But once again, one of the major contributions was this aspect of ascribing coordinates to all the places and also describing or including details related to each of those. So a handy reference point, if you want to put it that way, from the perspective of Ptolemy's work. Okay, so what have been some of the Greek impacts on modern geography? Well, of course, we've been talking an awful lot about cartography. One of the greatest influences is in the area of cartography. Cartography is the study and the practice of map making. Ptolemy in particular worked an awful lot with map projections. One of the major challenges in geography is taking a 3D real-world situation, okay, from the Earth, and then putting it on a 2D, two-dimensional model, okay, flattening it out. And Ptolemy actually had come up with some pretty sophisticated ways of dealing with that. His projections to try to maintain either equal area or equal distance, things of that nature, he made quite a few strides in that regard. Mathematical location, the whole concept of mathematical location, latitude and longitude, being able to ascribe points to these places and be able to locate them on the Earth's surface. Also, the historical geography aspect. People like Strabo, for example, drawn from the descriptions of the geographers to give us that historical geography basis or baseline. The other thing that I'd like to, I haven't really talked about this, but another contribution of the Greek geographers is in the area of environmental awareness, okay? Particularly today when we're concerned about climate change and our human impacts on the environment. Well, the Greeks, too, were aware of some of these issues, okay? There was a book that came out back in, I believe, 1967, Clarence Glacken, who was at UC Berkeley, called Traces on the Rhodian Shore, okay? Classic book, all geography grad students read it. I had to read it when I was a master's. I shouldn't say had to read it. I got to read it as a grad student because an awful lot of great information here. But going back through this, as I was preparing for the talk, I realized that Glacken had, because this is a look at how environmental awareness has changed over time, had prefaced the ancient Greeks. And the Greeks made reference to climate change due to human agency. Okay, on several occasions, one that he noted, Theophrastus, if I'm pronouncing that right, realized that the draining of a large marsh led to the disappearance of olive trees in the area and also led to colder local temperatures. So this was a fairly large marsh. When they drained it for whatever reason, then these impacts they became aware of these impacts. Hey, all of our olive trees died as a result of this. Things began to freeze to a greater extent. We had colder temperatures as a result of this, okay? The result of human agencies. Even Eratosthenes noted the negative impact of timber clear cutting on Cyprus. They were using this for fuel and also for agricultural expansion. They were also doing some copper mining here. And he noted the adverse impacts that those activities had on the landscape on Cyprus. So the Greeks made an awful lot of contributions to geography, but they've also made some contributions in the area of environmental awareness as well. Okay, and on that point, speaking of that, I want to leave you with there's the Temple of Hera on Sicily. If we don't heed some of those, some of those ideas, particularly related to our environment, our civilization could end up in ruins at some point as well. So I just want to leave you with that idea and open it up to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. You made geography really, really not Greek to me. Any questions? We have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. We are taping this, so this microphone is not for the sound per se, but for taping. So, what questions do you have? I have a couple. If you don't contribute, I will. Will you please go back to the maps slide? I have a couple of questions.
Which map?
The first one that they made a circle or something, the earlier ones that has a circle like that.
This one?
Yes, this one, please.
Okay.
First, how did they, this is one of the ancient ones, I guess. How did they come up with all these details? How did they do it technically? They sail or they walk or what?
No, these are, that's a really good question. Most of these were done by sailors, okay? So people who were out sailing were the ones who were actually making these, creating these early maps.
So they sail at a distance from the shore, and they say, we'll keep the distance, and they just, one of them would make a sketch as you go?
Correct, yeah, these were sketch maps for the most part.
But
And that's one of the reasons they're fairly accurate around the Mediterranean, because they sailed these, they were very intimate, they knew that coastline very, very well, and then they could reproduce it. That's why things begin to break down as you move away from that center. It's just more, it's speculation, it really is speculation.
Yes.
They have
And
no idea.
going to the same sequence, if not sailors here, I believe this was people on horses or on whatever, walking, doing these land parts.
Yes, that's true, although they also use, for example, along the Nile. I mean, the Nile was
the Nile is naturally. Because,
it's naturally so, and so a lot of the water bodies around there. But yes, the rest would be overland.
I may contribute here that the Nile was the easiest because when you are walking, you can just see the both sides, so you can all walk, and just have it in front of you. Just the sea is big, so you can't see the other side while you sail.
That's true.
Why is it that they stopped at this and they say the end of the world is here, be it flat or something? Why they thought that you'll fall? Why not continue?
Well, I think there was a real fear of what they would encounter to get too far away from the known world.
But if somebody takes his horse and just goes, he will continue going. Nobody would fall. So what the idea, where the idea of falling from the tip or the end of the world came? I mean, anybody?
You know,
Homer?
Go ahead.
Homer said that?
Not exactly, but
Something like
one
that?
gets the impression.
So they believed him.
Well, Homer carried a lot of authority.
Oh, really?
Homer carried a lot of authority even through to the age of Ptolemy. I mean, that's what's so interesting. And so a lot of the ideas of the fear of the Cyclops and so on and so forth, you're going to encounter these mythical beings if you move too far away from your home area. Carried a lot of weight.
Okay, I tell my students, if you don't ask or talk, make it interactive, I'll continue. So I have another one here.
Just to clarify, my understanding, because I'm a historian, but my understanding is that, like for example, the world map of Hecataeus of Miletus, this is just, there's no manuscript that survives from ancient times that has a map on it, right? And or of Hecataeus, even the map of Aristagoras that Herodotus says was presented to Cleomenes of Sparta. We don't actually have any maps per se in any surviving manuscripts from the ancient world. Is that correct?
That is correct. Matter of fact, a lot of these have been, for lack of a better term, doctored along the way, so to speak, based on perceptions. And a lot of this, even you might be able to add to this Strabo, because he had drawn an awful lot from what was extant at the time with Eratosthenes, but then that later disappeared. So you're right.
Yeah, I mean, we do have lots of detailed descriptions, as you say, geographia. So we have itineraries, we have descriptions, we have what are called periplus, descriptions of shorelines and so on. And Strabo is a good example of excruciatingly detailed descriptions and distances and so on. So we can reconstruct what we think they would have imagined their maps to look like.
That's right.
Based on those descriptions. But I thought that was the case. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's true.
Any other questions or comments? That's your chance. Yes, here is one. Can you say your name?
I am Mike. I'm one of the doctoral students. In the Odyssey, when he was traveling from island to island, did that help or influence like the mapping of all the different islands of Greece and knowing what the Sicily and stuff like that? Did that really help in the development of like kind of mapping out all the different islands in Greece?
Well, I don't know how to quite answer that question, because obviously that's a mythological story. But I guess from the perspective of geographers who came later who tried to map it out, it may have had an impact. Lee, do you have any insight on that?
I do.
Okay.
Just briefly, I'll just say, if you read the actual text of the Odyssey, we don't have much in the way of geographical markers. But there's it's mythological. Okay, the island of the Cyclops, the island of the Phaeacians, etc. But what later geographers, including Eratosthenes and Strabo, did was they superimposed on this mythological landscape a so on. So that's kind of what the way it sort of worked out.
From where did they get the idea of dividing lines like these? Latitude.
I really can't answer. I don't know where the idea came from. I think, that's applying mathematical principles to mapping. But I can't tell you, I can't pinpoint where that came from.
When we dig back in history, we found it always there. Somebody unknown did it.
Well, and here's the thing: is it wasn't just the Greeks. I mean, lots of different culture groups have used the grid system in their mapping. So it's not just the Greeks. I mean, we find it with the Turks and other groups.
Older, even.
But it's potentially older. But I guess I can't tell you what the origin is.
Okay.
If you're
This
asking.
map is modern one or old one? This,
That's just a schemata.
Schemata.
That's a schemata. Yeah,
okay.
that's just a
Now the
schemata.
other guy who came later went farther to Canary Islands. So they discovered these at the time?
Well, not discovered at the time. Those were the western extent. Let me see if I can find this of the quote-unquote known world. And you're referring, I think, to Ptolemy, is that right? Ptolemy's map? Yeah, so this was considered the western extent of the known world at the time. And once again, Lee may be able to add something to this. I've heard discussion, it's either the Canary Islands or Cape Verde. I'm not sure if they've settled on what that is, but that's...
Now, Christopher Columbus is credited for sailing on a flat surface, reaching the other side from this side, and he discovered that it is circular, and the rest is history. But when these guys sailed through the Mediterranean, crossing, they didn't see the land from the other side, but they didn't have the fear of falling or fear of they knew that they would reach Egypt, for example.
Well, I think that may just be almost a contextual issue because the Mediterranean Sea isn't that vast. You know, it's not like the ocean as they sailed out, past the Iberian Peninsula.
Okay.
There's nothing in sight
And
there.
maybe they did that after they went around it and knew that this is out and the end of it. So.
Right.
Well, I think Mike gave me the impression that we are living in a quantum. So if we are here and Greeks are here, so we are really, there is quantum here. I mean, it's continuous thing. And maybe if we are here, the future will be here. So it is, knowledge is kind of...
I was just going to point out, and it may be very obvious to people, that when they're putting this meridian out to the west of Europe there, and saying it's number one, it's as if the world is only going to go in one direction. And I think that if you think of Illinois towns, in which many of our students are coming from, the first street or main street is no longer at the edge of town, nor is it at the center of their town. And so geographers have always had this problem of naming anything.
That's right.
Because something comes later, and then all of a sudden you're -1 street and -2 streets, in which they don't want to use, and thus all the trees, the tree names, and those types of things. But I'm looking here of meridian number 1 being in islands that most of the persons in ancient Greece would not have gone to.
That's right.
And it would have been sort of the edge even for the sailors at some point to do that. But I'm always struck at where to start. And so they just start, and someone else has to pick up the next stage.
Well, it's sort of like the prime meridian today, of course, running through England. The Royal Observatory there. That was arbitrary in a sense. So.
Now, there is time for 2 silly questions, and I'll take the privilege of asking them. When the guy went to Alexandria and did his experiment with light, they didn't have cell phone to ask about what's going on in Aswan. How did they do that?
Well, that's a good question.
Different years, maybe, or something?
No, because it was well known that the well, that on the summer solstice that you could see the sun.
So
That was already
day,
known.
Summer solstice? They go
June
here,
21st.
Next year they go there and they compare, something like that?
Well, no, he was in Alexandria on the summer solstice, realizing that he knew the fact that in Aswan, that had already been established. And so he measured that in Alexandria on June 21st.
How, from where the idea came that the sunlight is parallel? I mean, should be parallel always.
Well, I don't...
Assumption that's
I don't know the origin of that either, but that can be ascribed to the Greeks. Lee, do you know? I don't. The rays of light coming down in a parallel.
So if it's at 7 degrees, then
Actually, we have visual depictions of that in Egypt, too.
really.
Before the Greeks, yeah.
Okay, so do we have some relations with Egypt regarding this? Any feedback, feed in, or there must be. Pythagoras was in Alexandria, I think, and
Well, I guess you could think of it as a continuation, and it also in a continuation of the Roman
they traded
Empire as
many
well.
things.
Yeah, they did.
Well, we have to stop, but I hope we don't stop thinking and searching, and I'll see you sometime soon in another session. Please give a round of applause again.
Thanks for coming.